How's it going, everybody? Welcome to my live stream for May 16th. I'll be talking about the top 3 stories that I wanted to get to. Basically, we've got our first story, which is about the anarchist symbol in the city of Hamilton being deemed hate speech. We have an interesting story where Turkey has called on Islam, nations of Islam, to rise up against Israel. And then we have the story about Antifa, Eric Clanton, also known as the Bike Lock Basher, his felony assault charges, and a story put out by Rolling Stone. So thanks for joining in. I've got to mute this because I'm getting feedback for some reason. But also, only in left ear. Oh, that's annoying. All right. I got a new microphone, and it, unsurprisingly, is only coming through one channel because it's through, let me see if this works. Can you hear me now? Is that better? How is the audio? I have an alternative for better audio. Let me know if the audio is... Oh, now it might be way too loud. Let me know if the audio is working. Oh, man. I see one comment asking to cover the Jawbreakers, Lost Souls, Antarctic Press instant. How is the audio quality good? Right, so I've got a series of microphones, and my interface is only through one channel, so I didn't expect that. But I have way better mic. The problem is I can only really test the audio quality when I'm actually live streaming, because I don't feel like setting up a second channel and doing like a dummy live stream. So yeah. And it's also hard to know how, at what point to limit the audio. So anyway, if you're just tuning in, make sure you hit the thumbs up button. You can subscribe to my channel. You can follow me on Twitter at Timcast. Join in the conversation on Super Chat. I can see your comments. They are on the screen. But if you give through Super Chat at least $5, your comment will appear above everybody else's. And if you give at least $2, your comment will appear in a special Super Chat box that I go through and I read. So first thing I want to do is I want to try and go through all of these stories. I think the world's ending in front of my apartment. I want to go through these stories rather quickly and try and focus on the conversation about what's going on. So actually, you know what I'm going to do? Yes, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do these stories first, and then I'm going to try and turn on my really good audio, and we'll see how it works out. So first, we have the story that you may have seen already, and I'll go through this one quickly, but the reason, you know, I want to make sure that I do talk about the main story I did for the day. So I do a video every day, and this is the story that I talked about. The city of Hamilton has deemed this symbol right here, this A hate symbol. And they've even compared it to a swastika. In my opinion, that's ridiculous. That just means anarchy. Anarchy is just a kind of political ideology. I guess Nazism is too, but anarchy is, I mean, you can be a right anarcho-capitalist. You could be a far-right anarcho-capitalist kind of person. It doesn't necessarily mean left-wing or anything. Typically, though, when we think about groups that are anarchist, it is often associated with the far left. And that's why in my video I talk about it backfiring on the far left. And anarchists tend to align with socialists and communists when they are involved in Antifa or anti-racist action, in which case you have authoritarians, even these people who claim to be anarchists are engaging in an authoritarian tactic, which is using violence against other people. The gist of this story, the city of Hamilton has forced a local anarchist group to remove the Circle A anarchy symbol from its headquarters, saying it is hate material similar to the swastika. City officials say they're taking direction from Hamilton police on the issue, but police say that's not the case. Okay, here's what's interesting. Apparently, it is they don't actually know what's going on in government. The police say it's not a hate crime. So let's see. It says. According to CBC News, Hamilton Police Hate Crime Unit provides the city with a list of hate symbols. Jerome Stewart, a constable, said police do not classify the anarchy symbol as problematic. The reason, so basically, here's the gist of the story. Local anarchist group was ordered to remove the symbol. Police are saying it's not a hate symbol, but the city is saying it is, and it has to come down. Now I'll tell you why this is interesting. I know many of you probably seen the video, so we'll get through this quickly. This is either an instance of government bureaucracy. Yes, it is a hate symbol. It is listed as a hate symbol, and the police just aren't aware yet. Or This might be a small group of individuals who are angry at anarchists who politically disagree and are wielding their power against them. I think the simple solution here is that it's just government bureaucracy. The city probably does deem this a hate symbol, and it needs to come down. But I want to point out the possibility that there is some chance here that this is someone just trying to say, they don't like anarchists and they want the symbol to come down. And that means hate speech laws will be used against you by corrupt individuals, if that's the case. Ultimately, I think we all know this. When a law is passed, it's going to be used to its extreme, right? And the story I like to tell people is, I read this, I don't know how true this is a bit apocryphal, but I read a story about how New York banned public drinking. And apparently, according to legend, a politician said, this law will never be construed to say that a man can't enjoy a beer with his lunch. The idea being that the law was passed to stop drunken, homeless people and other erratically inebriated individuals from causing problems. But they didn't want to pass the law to stop someone from, sitting on a bench and having a beer while they ate a sandwich. However, today, it's entirely illegal to drink in public, period. And there's the story about a black police officer who got angry about police going to his neighborhood up in Harlem in the Bronx and giving out public drinking tickets to young men drinking on their stairs. Like, these are people sitting in front of their own homes having a 40. And the police were like, you're drinking in public, you get a ticket. So this officer went to Central Park and started handing out tickets to young couples drinking wine in the park with picnics. And he said, if public drinking is illegal, it's illegal for everybody. Obviously, he got in trouble. The city, the police commissioner, and it was a big hubbub. The rich Central Park people were like, oh, I never, how dare you? And certainly he got in trouble for it, and these people were allowed to drink in public. But the idea is, when you pass laws, it will be used against everyone to the most extreme degree. So I want to hop over and make sure I'm not missing any super chats here from you guys. And it looks like we've got a couple. WZRBS says, Mike is meh. I'll do an experiment after these next two stories. Dakota Stanton says, I would watch, but Joe Rogan has Steven Tyler on. By all means, watch whoever you feel like watching. I'm doing these videos. They're going to be, I'm trying to do Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but when I'm traveling, it's impossible, so this is the latest. And now let's move on very quickly to the next story here, because these are getting pretty crazy. And we're going to do... This kind of freaked me out. This is Press TV. Turkey urges Islamic world to unite against Israel and calls for a summit. That's basically the story. Turkish Prime Minister Binali Yildirim, can't pronounce his name, forgive me, told his ruling party in parliament that Ankara would call an extraordinary summit of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Islamic countries should, without fail, review their relations with Israel, Premier Yildirim said, adding, the Islamic world should move as one, with one voice against this massacre. So again, I think you guys might be able to hear the sirens. I think the world is ending in front of my apartment. Basically, what's going on is, Israel killed 50-plus people in Gaza as protests. This is a challenge, right? Let's talk about this. What the left is saying is there are protests. They're saying these people are unarmed, and they're, protesting the embassy in Jerusalem. They're in the Gaza Strip. Jerusalem is in the West Bank. It's split between Israel and the West Bank. And people on the left are saying that it's a massacre by Israel. Israel is committing war crimes and things like that. However, it is true, at least I've seen some photos, I'm not an expert on this and I haven't covered this extensively, that there are people, Palestinians, who are throwing Molotov cocktails and rocks at the IDF. So there is a conflict here. And the real issue is not, one side being right or being wrong. It's a disproportionate use of power. There was a story I read about a doctor being shot in the legs. This is a doctor who was a field medic, absolutely should not have been shot, and he was shot through both of his legs. So there's a lot of bad stuff happening. But I don't want to focus on that because I am not a Middle Eastern expert. I just want to focus on this story of Turkey's response to what's happening in Israel by calling for a summit to unite the Islamic world against Israel. And that just sounds like more conflict, and it sounds like things could potentially get really, really bad. So that being said, I want to make sure that's basically just if I want to pop over to these super chats and make sure I get you guys. RTKO Tart said, Tim, this was a backlash towards the anarchist group called the Tower after they were linked to a recent vandalism in the Hamilton area. Right, that's one part. That's part of the story that After a bunch of damage was done, the city was like, okay, you know, you're a hate group and things like that. Their windows were broken out apparently, and then some boards were put up. It's a bit complicated, but I don't want to, you know, dive back into that. Prince Charming just did a super chat for $10. Really appreciate the super chat. And then I'll just try and grab some regular comments before we just pop over to the last story, which shouldn't take too long. And, well, I guess that's it. Someone says, time Israel gets payback, karma. Let's hop over to this next story. Antifa on trial. How a college professor joined the left's radical ranks. And the reason I'm talking about this is it's not really new information, but the Rolling Stone did an interview with Eric Clanton just the other day, talking about how he came to be the violent man who bashed someone over the head with a bike lock. The reason this is interesting is that although it does mention, you know, their M80s and skirmishes broke out. Let's see, it says the men from Rise Above charged across the Antifa front line. People were body slammed. So let's talk about what happened in Berkeley, because I was there. First, there was an event being held by run-of-the-mill conservatives. There were some people there who were far right, actual, you know, like neo-Nazi-ish types, white supremacists and white nationalists. Not to necessarily lump nationalists with the supremacists, though there's an overlap between their members. The anti-fascist crossed the barrier first, and then the police separated them. But, excuse me, but then it was this guy, this blonde guy with a black skull balaclava who jumped the barrier and punched someone in the face, and that's when everything kind of got set off. M80s were thrown there, Molotov cocktails. It says tear gas filled the air, but I'm not sure. I don't think tear gas was used at all. There were mortars, and Antifa had some kind of makeshift 2-liter bottles, smoke bombs. But one of the things that I find particularly interesting about this is that, here's what it says: amid the chaos was a brief but brutal scene of violence. Out on the street, a young anti-fascist dressed in a hoodie, his face obscured by a bandana, swung what seemed to be a large metal bike lock squarely onto the skull of an unwitting alt-right demonstrator. We don't know that the guy who got hit was alt-right. In fact, I'm pretty sure he wasn't. I think he was just like a conservative anti-feminist guy, not a white nationalist. He was wearing like a Sriracha t-shirt or something. The victim was 20-year-old college student Sean Stiles, who made the trip to Berkeley from his home in Santa Cruz. Though Stiles had been consorting with men from Rise Above, so maybe he was alt-right, or maybe they're just insinuating he was. The bike lock attack was unprovoked. Stiles had been arguing with 2 young leftist women about illegal immigration. When he was hit, he simply put his hands on his head, which started gushing blood. The reason I want to point this out is that the man who got hit had his hands in the air and was on his knees. To say that he was arguing with 2 young leftist women about illegal immigration is a bit disingenuous. No, Stiles was on his knees with his hands in the air when Clanton snuck up through the crowd and cracked him over the skull. That was a kill shot, okay? I want to stress that. When you strike someone with a hammer-like device, this is a bike lock, it's a U-lock, it's basically a hammer, on the top back of their skull, that is from my first aid training and hostile environment training, that is a killing blow. That is a lethal strike. That is an attempt to murder someone. And what this story doesn't seem to mention, I'm pretty sure, is that Eric Clanton is charged with striking 7 people over the head. The reason I'm bringing up this story is that while it's not entirely on Clanton's side, it does kind of run cover in a sense. This is a story being done about Clanton that, you know, talks about how he came to be radicalized, but I think it needs to point out that he is charged with striking 7 people, and it also doesn't mention that the man was on his knees with his hands in the air. So it talks about how 4chan was able to dig up information on Eric Clanton, and then, you know, there you go. They got him. So let me see if I can work a little experiment here real quick and improve the audio dramatically. So if I can do this, you guys will be very happy. But let's hop over to these super chats. So Michael Brenzel says, Saudis are friending Israel to counter Iran. Islam countries don't want losing a war to Israel. Turkey going to war with Israel would implicate NATO. It's really complicated. Turkey is an ally. It's complicated. They are kind of Turkey's an awful country, and it sucks because they've got great history. You know, Ataturk is. I'm not a history buff. I don't know a ton about Ataturk, but I've heard great things that he was very, you know, like kind of like the American founding fathers, very praised by the Turkish people. But they're rather authoritarian, arresting journalists and things like that. So Turkey's got a lot of problems. Military coup attempts and Erdogan presidency is, yeah. So let's go down. We got awesome. What does it say? Awesome Anus. Tim, have you seen the trailer for Romper Stomper TV series from Australia, Cultural Civil War? I have not, but I'll look it up after this. Dylan Fish says, I helped Tim spread news worldwide. Much yes, real news. Thank. And now I want to try and fix this microphone because I think I can make something cool happen if I get this turned on. So, crap. Okay, that's a good sign. I'm going to do an experiment with the audio real quick, so bear with me. Military coup attempt. All right. The audio might cut out right now. Stand by. Couldn't get it to work. I'd have to fiddle with it, and I don't think I should. Actually, you know what? I think I might be able to get it to work. So here's the thing. I've got an HDMI hooked up to my really nice camera. It is on. I don't know what it's set to, which is the problem. And if it's not set to camera, the audio won't play. So let's give this another shot. I don't know. I do have the sniffles. Somebody noticed. Let's pop back over to the super chat. We got J-Rock. If just Googling things counts as journalism, then I guess you deserve a little bit of money. Sorry that it's Canadian money. Canadian money is always welcome. But you know what? I'll take this time to point something out. Back when I worked, you know, before Vice, when I was independent and doing live on-the-ground breaking news, and then even working at Vice, and then even working at Fusion. Big news stories where you can actually go on the ground and produce some real valuable coverage are ridiculously few and far between. I think before Vice it was like once a month. Then as the big news kind of slowed down, it was once every other month. And then at Vice I produced a doc like once every 2 months, and I was traveling maybe once. I was traveling a lot, but covering stories on the ground was like every 6 weeks or so. People don't realize, and this is really annoying, that when I started making daily videos on my YouTube channel, I did more work, right? So I'm doing the same thing I've done before, right? Like with Sweden. There was a big breaking news story. We went on the ground, and we covered it for just about like 10 days or so. Ultimately, it was like 17 videos, so it was almost 2 weeks. Then news kind of slowed down, and I went and then covered the Antifa stuff, the free speech rallies, the Battle of Berkeley, and things like that. And those were like once a month or once every other month. It was like March, then April, then June, then July. It was like literally one event was happening every month. In between this, I have produced a video every single day. So a lot of people who aren't familiar with my work are like, what? All he does is make videos where he talks about news stories on the internet. And it's like, yes, because that is substantially more work than I did in the past. I'm just going to turn this off. This camera's not working. Whereas before, people were supporting me on Patreon, and I would do a live stream like every 2 months. Now I'm producing a video every single day. And the reason for this is breaking news is extremely rare, and you have to do something in between that. So when breaking news happens, yes, I'll be on the ground, and I'll tell you what's going on. Let me hit these super chats. Mr. Nicktown says, what do you think about doing a trip to the southern border with ICE? Well, I don't know about doing a trip with ICE, But I was actually thinking about going down because there's that large caravan coming from Central America trying to come up through the border. And I thought that would be interesting. The problem is infrastructure and what's really the story. I mean, I could theoretically go to the Mexico side and try and do interviews with people, but for the most part, you kind of know what the story is, and you don't really need someone on the ground. You know, so I was like, yeah. But there is an interesting story on the Canadian border of immigrants, you know, from Central America and other countries trying to go to Canada, which would be interesting. Alexander Podwill says, what OS do you run for your video rig? Are you a hardcore Linux? No. I used to run Ubuntu dual boot on most of my computers, but it's a lot of fun, and I would use Kden Live for video editing. This is back in the day, because I liked using the console for like downloading. It's just so much easier when you can just type in like, you know, apt-get or whatever. But ultimately, I need Adobe and then Steam and other games. It's not really on Linux, so as much as Ubuntu is great, eventually I'm just like, yeah, it's not really doing anything for me, so Dylan Fish wants to know if I have hair on my head. Technically, there is hair on my head, right? Like my eyebrows and my mustache and the sides of my head. Ryan North says, cheers from Discord crew, patron 2. Was a bike courier for years, including in DC. I've used a bike lock defensively. They are serious business. Yes. My friends who are couriers in Chicago call it U-lock justice. U-locks are hammers. They grip them, and you have the bar, and then they whack. That stuff's no joke. Someone says, think he skates. Are you talking about me? I do skate. Someone says, hopping the border into Canada are pretending to be poor. You can walk near the border to find iPhones and expensive gadgets discarded by immigrants. Is that true? Man, that sounds like a really interesting story, and I'm only like, I don't know, I think like 8 hours away. It would be interesting to drive up there. I know Luke Radowski and Lauren Southern went up there at one point, and it was really interesting. There's like people in cars like hiding, and I'm pretty sure the Canadian-U.S. border is like rather insecure. I mean, technically, all of our borders are rather insecure. Like most of the southern border is just nothing, and then the water borders are just basically like water protecting us. So, Bold Like a Leopard says, Matt's file is spreading, Tim, but we could use your help. You know, it's right now we've got like 2 big things that we're digging through. I have a list of like 50 links of left-wing attacks on random individuals, and then we're also looking into like Gamergate stuff, so it's just really hard to pile more on the plate. One of the things that I wanted to do, actually, let me get the super chat first from Nusantara Rising. Indonesia just banned Hizbut Tahrir, and a week later, terrorist attacks. We had to ban them because they were radicalizing others. Thoughts? I don't know a whole lot about it, unfortunately, so I apologize. Important updates are pending. Oh, it's trying to restart my computer on me. This is why Windows, this is funny. We're talking about whether or not I should use Linux, and right now it's actually telling me, I can't stand this. I've got a bunch of programs open that I need to be open, you know? Let's just call it 2 a.m. 2 a.m. Wait, what? It's making me do this right now. Can you believe it? 2 a.m. tomorrow. You're done. Terrible, terrible operating system. Someone just said Luke Radowski. Say it, Tim. Actually, that's not true. His name is Luke Rudkowski. Okay, that is a fact. He knows it's a fact. He just doesn't say the K because apparently a long time ago someone was talking about him on some show and they didn't pronounce his name correctly. And so he gained a ton of followers who called him Luke Radowski when his actual name is Luke Rudkowski. Okay, so his name is Rudkowski. That's his name. End of story. Someone says, hey, Tim, Antifa been to quite... I think that's a grammatical mistake. But the word on the streets of Chicago, a new group is building up fast against Antifa. They even had some people getting ready to fight Antifa and communism. So yeah, right now I have a huge list of these attacks because here's what basically happened. This is a funny story, by the way. Somebody who works at the Gizmodo Media Group tweeted about Univision dying. Okay, Univision bought Gawker basically, but Gawker itself is removed, and now they call it the Gizmodo Media Group. For some reason, Gizmodo is the one who took the cake. And this includes like Jezebel, Kotaku, Deadspin, etc. It got lumped into what's called the Fusion Media Group, which is like Fusion, The Root, The Onion, etc. Basically, Univision is trying to buy up a bunch of successful digital brands to make some kind of sustainable enterprise because they're dying. Well, unfortunately, because of this, now they're all dying. And that includes Gizmodo. Although technically, Gizmodo is successful, and some of these blogs within the Gizmodo Media Group are making money, because they're on a sinking boat. Look at it this way. You have a boat, it's sinking. You can be on the boat and climbing up a ladder to the top of one of those, smokestack majiggers, and even though you are gaining altitude, your boat is still sinking, in which case Gizmodo can be as successful as it wants. The boat it's on is sinking. And so I commented on this tweet about how one of the biggest criticisms of the Gizmodo Media Group, of the Fusion Media Group, is that they hire activists and not journalists. And this is exemplified in the example, in the actual link provided by this journalist, which was by someone named Del Cameron. Del Cameron used to run the Twitter account Your Anon News. He went by the name DB Koopa, and he was a very, very high-profile anonymous activist. He had control over what was called Yan. Your Anon News got like 1.2 million followers. I got the super chat here, but I'm going to, carry on the story, and then I'll get back to it. So basically, this guy got super pissed off at me for bringing it up. I think it's a relevant criticism because I'm pretty sure that while he was running DB Koopa and running Yan, he was writing for Vice. So that means Vice, to the best of my understanding at the time, they had an activist at the highest levels of what you could call anonymous, even though it's not really like a group, working for them and writing for them. And now this person writes for Gizmodo, in which case I think the criticism is fine. And that's all I said. I said one of the biggest criticisms is, hire activists, and this is exemplified by Del Cameron, who used to run Yen. To which his response was something about Richard Spencer and how he didn't like him, which I don't understand. And then he mentioned that I wear a hat in the summer, which also was not an argument. And from this, I started getting a bunch of these, left-wing journalists, activists, I just call them activists, complaining. One of them said that I was a kinda pro-fascist activist, which is another ad hominem and just very poorly done. But I'm going to jump down to the super chat because I know there's a couple in here. Alexander Podwill says, do you think authoritarians will get vocal enough to pass hate speech laws in America, similar to the ones in the UK, or do you think the First Amendment is ironclad enough to completely prevent it? I mean, those are both rather extreme. I don't know. We have hate speech laws. Let's call it that. Look, you can call a law whatever you want. We can be specific and say there's never going to be a law in the books because of the First Amendment. But the reality is YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, everywhere where public discourse takes place is going to ban you for hate speech. Paul Joseph Watson today, his video got restricted because he was talking about This Is America and crime statistics. Ultimately, I believe they removed the restriction from his video. But look, YouTube's going to get rid of hate speech. Facebook is going to get rid of hate speech. Sure, the government's not going to restrict you, but Facebook is. And if you can't communicate your political opinions, if you can have regular opinions on Facebook, doesn't matter that we have a law. There's another super chat here. Chris Primer said, Maddox lost, Dick wins. There's another little update that for those that are following the Dick Masterson-Maddox lawsuit, the court has sided with Dick and I believe Weber Shandwick. Basically, it was a lawsuit about Maddox is claiming harassment, but the courts ultimately said that it was criticism of a public figure. Maddox is an internet personality. Ultimately, he lost. But the only thing I can really add to this is that it's possible he will refile in California and refile in New York against another defendant, Asterios Kokkinos. So I guess we'll see what that where that goes. Talking back about free speech and hate speech is that I did a video on this, about this a little while ago, like last week or maybe a couple weeks ago. Every company has a hate speech policy, has a violence policy, has an extremism policy. Visa and MasterCard, they have policies. I don't know exactly what their policies are because I don't do business with them, but I was told that they basically have the same policy as anybody else, that money can't be transferred between groups for illegal activities or groups that are considered like violent extremists because of U.S. law. So think about what that means. If inciting to violence is illegal, any group that is accused of inciting to violence, whether they are or not, will have their financial services terminated, will have their domain name service terminated, will have their data centers terminated, their hosting terminated. at every level of a business, at every level of digital speech, you can be shut down. Doesn't matter if Patreon cares what you're doing. Stripe handles the transactions for Patreon. If Stripe says, delete them, Patreon will. End of story. Madman00 says, hey Tim, why does Antifa hate you so much despite being a leftist yourself and defending them a lot of times? I don't think I defend Antifa all that often, though I have defended them in the past. Most particularly, there's two things to bring up. I actually interviewed an anti-fascist in San Bernardino who was an anarchist and said he denounces violence, doesn't believe in violence. And then we had a conversation about Antifa and violence stuff, and he had a calm conversation with me, wore a mask, and we were just fine. And I think that is entirely defensible. This is an example of the fact that not everyone who aligns with Antifa is a violent authoritarian. But, however, too often when we see these black bloc protests, they're engaging in an authoritarian tactic. And to clarify what that means, on the political compass, you have the libertarian, meaning personal freedoms, individual liberties. Anarchists fall on the libertarian spectrum. However, Antifa is authoritarian in that they believe they have a right to use violence against other people to force their views into existence or to prevent someone from engaging in a behavior. That is the authoritarian spectrum. If you are in Antifa and are of that spectrum, you literally cannot be an anarchist. Okay, so it's an important distinction there. But I also do want to point out that there are many people who consider themselves Antifa who don't know anything about what is happening at these political rallies. And that's why I mentioned earlier that we have this huge list of instances where the left has provoked, attacked, or unjustly harmed another person. Because when I try to talk to people, and I'll get back to, basically I was telling that story about Gizmodo, and the reason for it was this woman mentioned that in one of my tweets I equated Antifa to fascists. The only difference being that Antifa doesn't believe in borders. Fascism is authoritarian nationalism. Antifa, as we understand it colloquially, is an authoritarian globalist faction, in which case you have two authoritarian groups who disagree over how borders should function. But at the end of the day, they're both authoritarian. And I had to explain this to them. So that's kind of the point I want to bring up. I started working on this video. I've got to figure out exactly how to do it. I think it's going to be like a half an hour to an hour long, because when you go through every instance of violence perpetrated by the left and far left against innocent people, it is ridiculously long. In fact, honestly, it could be like 3 hours if we go through all the videos. The point is, the script so far in the beginning highlights right-wing terrorism and instances of right-wing individuals attacking the left, because the goal of the video is not to apologize for right-wing violence or far-right terror, but to point out specifically that the left does engage in similar behaviors, and that many people on the left don't know this because they're in a bubble. The goal of this video is to highlight these attacks so that when you are talking with someone who says Antifa is innocent, they only fight Nazis, you can say, here's a video showing 73 instances where Antifa and individuals on the left attacked innocent people, including the elderly, including videos of people walking down the street minding their own business, including 6-year-olds on a bus, including what we heard the other day of a man enjoying a meal at Cheesecake Factory with his family, and he was called the N-word by employees of Cheesecake Factory. These things happen. A man from Denmark recently was robbed of his MAGA hat at knife point. He was a Danish tourist in New York, I believe it was New York, walking into a subway when a white man in his 20s or 30s grabbed the hat off his head, and then as they were fighting, the man flashed his knife, and the Danish man let his hat go. These stories exist, and I want to compile a video explaining exactly that, right? That we can acknowledge far-right terror. We have groups that track far-right terror. We know about it. These are high-profile events where people go into churches and commit atrocities. These things are horrifying. They need to be called out. They are called out. But too often, the attacks from the left are overlooked. Yes, they are covered in the news. That's exactly how I'm able to pull up these sources. But people on the left tend to ignore these things because they're in the left. They're not going to share criticism of themselves. The goal of this video will simply to be somebody who is on the left, who doesn't believe the left is engaging in these tactics, can watch the video and say, wow. But you know what? It's even more, to pull back even a little bit. Maybe people on the left will refuse to watch it because people love their echo chambers and just don't want to watch anything that contradicts their point of view. But at least there will be something for the uninitiated. People who might only believe that Charlottesville was violence from the right. They might be thinking that Charlottesville was a bunch of noble left-wing protesters singing songs when a violent white nationalist ran people down in his car. When in reality, you had the most egregious offense from one of the rally attendees, but there were people there with crowbars, baseball bats, and other weapons. It was a scuffle between two warring factions, of which the right took the most egregious steps and ran people down with a car. And they should be held accountable for that, absolutely. But I think people need to realize, when Trump said that there were bad people there on both sides, he wasn't wrong. And people just, the emotions were too high. Yes, a man took his car and ran people down. That is horrifying, 100%. But it doesn't mean we ignore what actually happened at that rally. And that means we need to acknowledge that violence comes from every faction. I don't want to make a video alleging that one side is necessarily worse than the other because I don't even know how you make that assessment. The point is specifically to highlight these moments because they need to be highlighted. So let's see, you got some super chats here. Digital VHS says, do LSD responsibly. I will never do LSD. Alexander Podwell said, do you think alt tech will ever get large enough to change the culture around free speech? Yes, but I think it's going to be more of like straws on a camel's back or grains of sand making a heap. Minds, BitChute, we have a bunch of other alternative platforms. I hate calling Minds and BitChute alternative because they're unique services on their own right. BitChute automatically backs up and archives all of my YouTube videos. The reason why that's so damn important, if a video gets taken down unjustly, it will still exist and be shareable. And information is important and should be free. I don't mean free as in beer, free as in freedom. Wait, yes, not free as in beer, free as in freedom. Meaning everyone has a right to access the information, but people deserve money for their labor. It's a complicated hacker thing. I don't want to get into the entire philosophy of it. But Minds is an excellent platform. I use it every single day. I'm trying to increase the amount that I use it, but I've got a lot of platforms already, and they're backups. So I think we're going to see more platforms rise and more use will start to get distributed. It's really difficult because YouTube has a monopoly. Michael Bennett says, weren't the Nazis aiming to be an authoritarian globalist as well? Just the entire world under their rule? Technically, I'm not a historian, but I think their goal was to be a superpower, first and foremost. So yes, technically, that ultimately leads to globalism under like the German banner. So at the end of the day, anybody who wants world domination is a globalist. And if Antifa doesn't believe in national borders and they believe in a one global community, they're also technically globalists. So then I guess you can't really call the far right fascist, or can you? I guess it's complicated. Just call them all authoritarians. I was talking to some friends and I was like, can we just make up a word that describes politically violent people so that people who are nonviolent can say, oh, those are like dodus or fubars. Just make up some dumb word. Yeah, there you go. Fubar. Fucked up beyond all... Oh, I shouldn't swear. I'm going to get demonetized. Fucked up beyond all recognition. That way, when you see the far left and the far right punching each other in the street, you can just be like, oh, a bunch of fubars showed up. And, yeah, whenever there's like a rally like this, you see a bunch of fubars. And people are like, what does fubar mean? It means anyone who uses violence for political reasons, period. That way you can put Antifa and the Nazis in the same little group and say, as far as I'm concerned, anybody who wants to beat another individual to force their way of life on someone else is a problem. Okay? Yeah, we can get a technical distinction, and you can think you're the good guy on whatever side you're on, but as far as I'm concerned, if you want to go around beating people, you're the problem. Contra says, we will only work together when we have a common enemy like aliens. That's the only thing that will bring us together without religion or race. You ever read Watchmen, that comic? Yeah. If an alien invasion came right now, the world would unite instantly. And I think there's going to be a problem because we are becoming a global community. There will be a one world government. The UN exists. We have the building blocks of one world government. But what happens when we have a one world government and there's no conflict anymore? There's no competition between nations, in which case, I mean, we'll have regional conflict for sure. There'll still be riots. There'll still be violence. But ultimately, someone said snafu is better than fubar. But anyway, humans unite when they have an enemy. France and Britain used to be enemies. trade unites and common enemies unite. So, you know what I think? Here's my current prediction of the future. We are going to have peace, globalism, and everyone is going to spend most of their time in little pods in virtual reality. You know, maybe we'll discover faster than light travel or something. Maybe we'll get off Earth and colonize Mars. But ultimately, what do you think people on Earth are going to do? We're already playing video games a lot. I think with the universe ever expanding, unless there's some kind of, you know, something I can't even fathom, which, you know, yeah, I think so. I think it's entirely reasonable to say, if not the most apt thing to say, is that we're too stupid to understand how powerful humans can become and that we can travel the universe. Maybe, maybe not. But I think right now, based on the technology we have, how fast our propulsion systems can go, and the speed at which we can build, we're going to end up with a bunch of people in virtual reality pods building inner universes. And some of them will be MMOs, some of them will be single player. It's going to be video games. Could you imagine how badass it would be to have a game like Skyrim, where you could put on a virtual reality helmet that links with your, you know, actual brain waves and your nerves, so you can actually control yourself in this universe. And the characters are all procedurally generated artificial intelligence you can actually interact with. And then, after you've played the game, you get access to console commands where you could manipulate people. Basically, you can create your own universe where you get to be God. You can play a game like Zelda and be the hero, or you can then just manipulate the game and fly around. And I think that's what we're headed towards. Virtual reality. Maybe that'll be the future. I don't know. Maybe it's not possible to colonize the universe, but we'll create this perfect little sphere where everyone's just gooey, weak, you know, no muscles, no bone mass, but in your own little universe, you'll be really powerful. Somebody said, pretty sure the term you're looking for is douchebag. Yeah, I agree. People who use violence to force their politics on others are douchebags, but that's a word that means something. You know, if you make up a new word, people will be like, I've never heard that word. What does that mean? Oh, a zabby is a politically violent moron. Or, yeah, just a morbo. That we a reference to Futurama, that angry guy who's always yelling. No, I shouldn't disparage Morbo. He seems like a nice guy, actually. Dylan Fish said, did you ever notice the video suggestions on your recent gun violence video? Tons of finger family type nursery rhyme videos. They're still watching. I have no idea why that happened. I don't think it's just my channel, because recommended videos have to do with what you watch, too. So I think if it's affecting more than one people, it's a mix of my channel and something YouTube did with the algorithm, because it's affecting other videos I've done. I'll upload a video, and in the first 10 minutes, this weird nursery rhyme trend happens, and then 10 minutes later, it's gone. That says to me that YouTube's algorithm is busted, that it knows, you know, I think what's happening is it's not calculating what my video should be listed under right away. The fact that all of the videos have corrected themselves within 10 minutes says to me that the YouTube algorithm is functioning, and this is some kind of error that has to get corrected. Someone said Tim could do all of the skateboard tricks in virtual reality. Well, have you played EA Skate? You just flick the PS controller and you can do the tricks. In which case, imagine what life would be like in a virtual reality game where you can just do everything perfectly. That'd be somewhat. That was great. Morvo. Someone said, it happens when opening your video anonymously. In which case, it sounds like the algorithm isn't placing my video properly. And I don't know why. A video on gun violence? You know, so some people suggested that it's because I spelled out GUN. I've done that before. This has never happened. Not only that, none of the videos spell out things with hyphens or anything like that. And I changed it back to just the word gun, and it still happened. Not only that, my next video on sexual assault in colleges had the same problem. I'm pretty sure the phrase sexual assault isn't related to children's videos, so something weird is happening. So yeah, let's pop over to the old regular comments. Let's somebody pick a news story, I guess, and we'll talk, because we got about 17 minutes left on this. Again, Super Chat is available for anybody who feels like giving me money to help me do my work, and if you want your comment to appear, I read them. I'm thinking about setting up some kind of stream that's going to be like, I think it'd be cool to have like a news chat room where it's basically just a community room for people who want to chat, and then creating a stream where when you Super Chat, it reads your comment. Because that would be a cool way to just have an active like forum for people to comment and talk about news. But also, it helps generate revenue for, you know, my work outside of, you know, I don't know, basically it's like a long-running chat room where people can choose to, like, donate, but then get something for it. Obviously, if I set that up, I'd have to create a bunch of filters for what the computer can't say, and I'm sure people will come up with very clever ways to make the computer say these things anyway. But we'll see what happens. Michael Bennett pops in the super chat with Veil, violent authoritarian identity loyalist. Call the authoritarian group a bunch of veils. Veil isn't bad. I feel like it's got to be like at least 2 syllables though, like Veily or Veiler. You know, it's got to be like a doer of some kind, like an ER. You know, maybe Veiler can just work, and it can be violent authoritarian identity loyalist, egotistical. I don't want to say the R word because YouTube will ban my channel. Alexander Podwell says, just live stream your podcast. The problem with that, and I was thinking about it, is that like I think most of the podcasts are actually interviews. So if we do the podcast where it's like me, Emily, and Reactor sitting down talking about it, that makes sense. And often I find that those are entirely different from the interviews. But I like to mix it up. I like the podcast to be both. That works if we're having a conversation about news, but we wouldn't be able to interact with the chat anyway. And then with the interviews, we can't really do it because we're traveling. So, you know, kind of just, it is what it is. Sounds too much like Valor. Yeah, we don't want to call people Valor. Stolen Valor. Lava. What's like a word for asshole or jerk in another language? Observer 101 says, love your work, Tim. Can't wait until you come down and expose Marxist Australia. You know, there was a tweet I saw the other day where this Australian guy walked around a supermarket and there was like Asian people and a couple Muslims. And he looked at the camera and he was like, does this look like Melbourne to you? Doesn't look like Melbourne to me. And I think it was a comment. It was like I don't know who the guy is, and I don't want to accuse him of being anything he isn't because I don't know who he is. But it seemed awfully white nationalisty, like he was pointing out there were too many foreign non-whites in his supermarket. And to me, like, that argument's always been really strange because immigration's been around forever. Like, literally, the colonies are founded by immigrants. I think it would be really silly if an Aboriginal man walked through a market and was like, this doesn't look like Australia to me. There's a bunch of people from somewhere else who came here. And so the argument that people can't migrate legally is always strange to me. Like, look, I totally get it. Criticize illegal, unauthorized immigration, whatever you want to call it, to be politically correct. People should follow the laws on purpose because we need to regulate. Like, we need regulations for how. This is a pretty left-wing position. You know, the left is all about controlling and regulating, and we need to regulate immigration specifically to make sure we can take care of everyone, including the people who are coming here. You know, so I understand an argument against illegal and unauthorized immigration, whatever you call it, but to argue against legal migration is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And look, you're gonna ask me why? It's because my grandparents migrated here. It's like, it's a good thing. I enjoy it. I think legal immigration is fantastic. I think there are certain instances where there is justifiable illegal immigration. Nothing's absolute. There's nuance to everything. And I think it would be wise for everyone to recognize that there are instances where people literally have no choice. And I'm not talking about economic migration. I'm not talking about people who want to make more money, who just, you know, cross the border because they want to get a job. I'm talking about people who like watch their family get their heads blown off and run full speed towards the border and don't have time to file these things and like try and come through an airport because they're about to die. There are instances where literally someone has no choice, and it's an issue. But we as a country do offer refugee status and protect individuals who are facing these kinds of threats. Hopefully there's a way to deal with that, but that's an extreme example. I think when it comes to people who are, you know, coming to the U.S., we have we have rules for migration for a reason. And it's interesting because this has always been a left-wing position. Like Hillary Clinton was talking about a border barrier. That's not a right-wing position. In fact, technically, if you're talking about smaller government, then the further you go left or right, you start to lose borders. You know, you could be left or right and still talk about having regulation for migration. And the point is, if you are someone on the left and you believe in a welfare state, not socialism even, like just like a welfare state, like high taxes on the wealthy to distribute, redistribute wealth towards the lower class to keep like a more even society. If that's your position, if you're someone like Bernie Sanders, you need to regulate migration, otherwise you can't sustain your social welfare system. The reason Scandinavia works so well with social welfare is because they control migration, and Sweden's actually going to be facing a lot of problems with that. We'll see what happens. Let me get these super chats. Sean Rufus says, Luke WRC Weird Change lost his MCR, it's MCN, multi-channel network, or whatever. It's called, have you heard of any other large channels having problems? Yes, I did a video about it. A ton of channels got axed because YouTube has increased, they've made it very, very strict as to how MCNs have to operate. I don't blame the MCNs for this because they're probably going to go out of business. A Sojourner says, progressive liberals aren't progressives, they're regressive. This particular super chat is because I believe in free speech, even though I do not always agree with you. Very appreciated. I think it's important to point out you can be a progressive liberal and not be regressive. The problem is, at least in the mainstream conversation, most people that we assume to be progressive liberals are actually regressives, okay? So this is what bothers me. I don't think people know what classical liberal means. Classical liberal is kind of a right-wing position. It's just a little bit left of libertarian, the big L libertarian. So you're kind of center-right. I know that Sargon has referred to him. I'm not sure if he's referred to himself as this way. I think he just calls himself a straight liberal, and I think that's fair considering he is a center-left libertarian, and a lot of people kind of equate that. But people call themselves classical liberals, and when they do, they're saying they're right-wing. Dave Rubin for a long time said he was a classical liberal, and I believe he was saying like he is a liberal from like the 90s. Like I think he thought it meant specifically that he was a liberal before the regressive left took over. But classical liberal does actually refer to right-wing. Sargon on the political spectrum is a social liberal. It's not absolute, it's not 100%, but he did the test. He's a center-left libertarian. So people like Count Dankula and Sargon are social liberals, of which I would say I'm more close to social liberal than anything else. But I don't know. I hate to use titles because I'm not an expert. I don't know what these words mean. You know, and then you say something, and then everyone, like this, classic liberal is a perfect example. A lot of people were like, I'm a classical liberal, thinking they were telling people they were left-wing, and they were telling people they were right-wing. So it's better just not to say anything. But I think it's an important distinction. And within that, I kind of get offended because, you know, again, me being offended doesn't result in anything, because I think just because you're offended doesn't give you any special rights or privileges. But when people call progressives and liberals, you know, like liberals have a mental disease, no, they don't. People with mental diseases who are liberal are a problem. And the regressives who claim to be progressive are a huge problem. Because I considered myself to be a progressive. But the problem is, people who call themselves progressive are actually regressive, so I'd rather not align with any of these people. Same thing for feminism. Like, the idea of equality sounds fantastic. I don't want to be involved in your group because you got too many extremists, and I don't want to be associated with extremists. So I'm not going to identify as anything because y'all are crazy. But ultimately, I want to defend progressives because initially progressive was about being for, you know, like gay rights and things like that. It was about opposing racism, which I'm sure most of us do. But at some point, the people who claim to be progressive started becoming authoritarian, and now they're regressive. So you can still be progressive at its core definition of what it is. Unfortunately, that will, at least in word, you know, by definition, or I should say not by definition, but at least visibly align you with regressives. And that's why it's just so annoying. You know, I like the idea of what classic progressivism. Can we use that? Yes, I'm a classic progressive. I believe in equality between the sexes in all facets, and I believe equality between individuals, and I hate racism and things like that. Classical progressivism. Observer 101 says, one thing that never gets talked about is the foundations of integral journalism. I was wondering what the key values of integral journalism are. I think it's just one is honesty, intellectual honesty. I have talked to journalists who told me even though the Associated Press issued public guidelines as to how people should use the word alt-right, even though the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Anti-Defamation League, USA Today, and many, many other news outlets have clearly defined what alt-right is. Even though Richard Spencer, Vox Day, and other high-profile alt-right individuals have clearly defined what alt-right is, there are journalists who say, yes, I disagree. Well, you can't just choose what a word means. That's not how English works. But apparently there are a group of people who decided they can change the definitions of words. Then you end up with stories calling Jordan Peterson alt-right. And when I talk to some of these journalists, they say, I don't agree with your definition of alt-right. It's not my definition. It's literally the vice president of standards for the Associated Press saying, here's what the word means. But they don't care. So we end up with people knowing that the SPLC, the ADL, the AP say alt-right means white identitarian, white ethno-state, white nationalism, etc. And then other people go, well, because I disagree with that definition, I'm going to use it. And then when people read the story, oops, they're going to believe that this person is a white identitarian. People are ridiculous. Alexander Podwell says, what's your opinion on redlining? Does it still have an effect on America? I'm not familiar. I don't know what that means. Sorry. Someone says, I'm Christian, I'm not opposed to gay rights, and I'm anti-racist. Apparently, all that still makes me alt-right or WTF. Yep. And this is what's fascinating is that when you compare Donald Trump to the previous Republican presidential candidates, Donald Trump got the Republican National Convention to cheer for the LGBT community. I thought that was a huge stride. But apparently Trump is the worst, most fascist Nazi president ever. Hillary Clinton called for building a border barrier with the U.S. and Mexico. So I guess the only difference between the two is that she called it a barrier and Trump called it a wall. It's strange to me that Trump's policies are rather moderate, especially on migration and LGBT, and rather progressive on a lot of issues. And he's even done deals with Democrats, yet for some reason, this guy's the worst. Look, I think Trump's a crude, crass individual. I think he's kind of gross, right? I think that's fair to say. He's a gross guy. He says a bunch of dumb stuff. He's a bad messenger for sure. But when he's talking about his policies, like the moratorium on travel from those 7 nations, like that was an Obama policy. Like Obama created the disposition matrix, the kill list. Obama persecuted more whistleblowers under the Espionage Act than all other presidents combined. Even journalists were prosecuted under the Espionage Act. Like I'm pretty sure Obama was a pretty authoritarian dude. So it's rather mind-blowing. I'm not saying Trump's better or worse, but it's crazy how that's the narrative, at least. I think we got all the super chats. Let's see. Dirt Dog says, all races can have racists. Yes, by the actual definition of the word racist, anybody can be racist. And as somebody who has recently visited Korea and is Korean, let me just tell you, Koreans are racist. They are overwhelmingly ethno-nationalists. They are supremacists. They really do believe that their race is smarter and better than everyone. And they take pride in it. So it's really strange then when you have like Chinese people who are really racist. Like there's a commercial where a Chinese woman puts a black man in a washing machine and he comes out Chinese. Like they laugh at that stuff. That everybody knows that movies with black leads don't do well in China because they're racist. And the ads for Black Panther had T'Challa wearing his mask because this is the narrative. I don't know if it's true, but apparently they were worried that if people saw there was a black man in the movie, Chinese people wouldn't go see it because they're so racist. So if the idea is that racism is prejudice plus power and only white people can be racist, well, what do you talk? We go talk to the Indian people. Like there's billions of them. There's tons of Chinese people. They're all racist. Like they don't like other races. Well, now they're calling it colorism, which is like, ugh. Yes, Scarlock says, leftists had to make up a word colorism to describe people of color who are racist because they defined racism as a white-only thing, which literally makes no sense. And I see people on Reddit actually using the word colorism. It's rather ridiculous. But we're about 2 minutes out from the end, so I want to thank everybody for hopping in. I will admit, this video, I was dealing with a new mic, so this isn't the best nightly live, top news that I plan on doing in the future. But I need to figure out how to make the mic work, and so it's been a bit of a conundrum. The other mic I was using before was a USB mic, and it was not that good. It's probably better than the mic I'm using now, but I'm trying to fix it, and so now I have this, and maybe there's a way I can set it to mono, I guess, monaural, so that it actually works. Observer 101 says, I was wondering your thoughts on what happened in Israel yesterday with the American embassy opening in Jerusalem and subsequent chaos. I don't see the reason why we needed to move the embassy to Jerusalem. All that's going to do is create controversy. I think Israel has a disproportionate amount of power and needs to what's the right word? They need to, let me just start by saying, heavy criticism straight to Israel. Because it doesn't matter whether or not the Palestinians were, people are saying, oh, but that was Hamas, right? The people who were throwing rocks and Molotovs were Hamas, and Israel was defending their border. Yeah, sure. But you got to take optics into consideration. Everybody knows the conflict between Israel and Gaza, and Palestine is tense and crazy, in which case it would be prudent of Israel to keep that in consideration when they're, defending their border, whatever you want to call it. The left is calling it a protest. The pro-Israel groups, not necessarily the right, are saying it was Israel defending their borders. Sure, Israel probably shouldn't fire tear gas at, doctors and random people. I get it. It's a complicated issue. Weighing in on the Israel-Palestine issue it's tough because people are so inflamed by this kind of stuff. But I think it's important to say that Israel should probably use less lethal measures when dealing with these kind of instances. If there was someone out there with a gun, shoot back. But there's a story I read about a doctor, a Canadian doctor. There's a Canadian guy helping the people on the Gaza side. I don't care what your opinion is on that. Medics have a right to operate in conflict, and they should, and they have a right to be unharmed. If you want to stop someone who's throwing a Molotov cocktail, by all means, but then don't stop the medic who's trying to make sure they survive your attack. This doctor got shot in the side of his leg, and it went through both of his legs. It was, the story said it was a sniper shot. Regardless, whether or not it was intentional or whether or not it was an accident, you've got a problem. Israel firing, rifle rounds that end up hitting a doctor is an issue. And so I think they need to figure out ways to deal with these kind of, conflicts without killing 50 plus people. It's like this photo's like a dead baby. Now, I know a lot of people are saying that it's propaganda and that it's Hamas trying to use human shields and things like that. Like I said, it's a very complicated issue. Essentially, Israel does what journalists and other people refer to as mowing the lawn, where every few years they bomb a bunch of sites in Gaza. People who are pro-Palestine saying, Israel's bombing schools and churches. Pro-Israel side says, well, Hamas and the Al-Qassam brigades are using schools and churches as launching sites, giving Israel no choice. It's a conflict, right? And I'm not here to take sides with anybody, but I think it is fair to criticize Israel for using live ammunition against people who weren't using live ammunition back. Molotov cocktails are lethal and can horribly disfigure individuals. Totally think that's a problem, but I think it is fair to say there was a disproportionate use of force. And whether or not you think it's justified, Israel needs to take into consideration international relations when they do things like this. And ultimately, I disagree with killing people, so I think there's criticism to go all around, but I do think it's fair to criticize Israel more heavily than those who are throwing Molotov cocktails. Nicole Roberto says, I'm Mexican and my parents were super racist. Lots of names for black people. Yeah, seriously. People who aren't white can be very racist. I don't understand how this is hard to understand. Like, when a Korean person, like, my grandma or something, says horrifying racial slurs, she's racist. Like, I don't understand why there's, like, I don't understand what, let me just say this. The left's argument about white-only racism is literally defending racists. That argument literally defends racists. Why would you do that? Let them be racist. But beats the hell out of me. Anyway, we're over an hour, and I appreciate everybody for tuning in, hanging out. Make sure you hit the thumbs up. If you want to pop any last-minute super chats before I finish, feel free to do so, and I'll try and get as many questions in before as I can before I sign off. You can follow me on Twitter. Subscribe to my YouTube channel for new videos every single day. I really want to see this YouTube thing become successful, but I want to point out that even though my channel is growing every day, my rank is decreasing. And what that basically means is there is inflation to YouTube, right? There's an inflation principle to the subscriber count. Basically how it works is that every day people subscribe to new channels. Over time, people are subscribed to way too many channels, and they stop getting notified and they stop watching certain channels. This results in the YouTube algorithm punishing your channel because people don't watch anymore. They call that subscriber burn. And if your subscribers aren't watching your channel, YouTube says, well, your channel must be bad. So YouTube stops showing your videos to even people who like your channel. It's a huge problem, and this is why there are many large channels that have been totally abandoned. There are channels with 1 million plus subscribers that stopped posting. There are channels hundreds of thousands that don't post anymore. So it's a big challenge. When my subscriber rank goes down, that means I am not beating inflation, and that means there's not great prospects for making this, what I'm doing on YouTube and social media last in the long term. I have to figure out how to make sure my channel can grow faster, meaning my rank needs to improve so I can beat subscriber inflation and actually sustain an audience that will allow me to fund my work and continue doing what I do. If that can't be done, in a few years, it will probably it'll probably end up with my channel being just totally inoperable. Meaning that even if you subscribe and like my channel, you're not going to get my views. I don't want to call anybody out, but I know somebody who's dealing with this right now. They have like, 6 or 700,000 subscribers, but can barely get 10,000 views on a video because YouTube has determined your subscribers are burned, your channel can't grow fast enough, you're out. YouTube's trying to make sure content stays fresh on the platform. And that means we're all running on a treadmill that is speeding up. And if your rank is going down, you are losing out to inflation. So it's a big challenge. Corey Galbraith says we need to make our own gatekeeper network. Blue Room says Arabs try to tear down the border to kill Jews. Arabs admit this much. Self-defense is a virtue. And I understand that perspective, and I want to point out Israel has to be very careful about how they deal with these situations because it's not just the Palestinians they have to be concerned about. It's the international community saying you can't do that, Israel. So whatever your opinion is, I'm not trying to defend one side or the other. I do think it's fair to criticize Israel more heavily because they killed a bunch of people and Palestine didn't kill a bunch of people. It's that simple, but Israel really needs to pay attention to their optics. So, hey, if you guys have any ideas how I can making the channel grow faster, that would be greatly appreciated. Looking for some collaborations. The link to the Discord server is in the description below. And if you go there, you can join in the chat. I'm in there periodically. Like, I'm doing work a lot, so I'm not always in there. But feel free to hop in. And again, thank you all so much for hanging out. On Twitter @TimCast, subscribe, click the little bell for notifications, and I'll see you all tomorrow.